This is a basic introduction to voltage modular. I'm going to show you how to create a very basic synthesizer on here. The first thing you'll need to do is to right click and click empty cabinet. And then you need to add an oscillator and an amplifier. The oscillator is probably the most important part of a synthesizer. That generates the sound. But the oscillator needs to know what pitch to generate the sound at. Now I'm using a little MIDI keyboard that I've plugged in via USB. This detects any sort of MIDI instrument pretty much, and that way I can take the pitch from my source and wire it in to the pitch of the oscillator. That means that when I press a note on my keyboard, the different notes will correspond to a different pitch for the oscillator. Now, of course, I won't get any sound out now because the oscillator isn't plugged into anything else. I need to plug the oscillator into the amplifier. So I'm going to use the square wave here, and that's going to go into my amplifier. Now, I still won't hear anything because my amplifier isn't plugged into anything. The amplifier will need to be plugged into some kind of speakers. The main output is what we need to plug it into. So we're going to take the output from the amplifier and plug it straight into the first output just there. Now, you can't hear anything at the moment until I start to wind up this gain a bit. And hopefully you could hear a tone there. Now I'm going to turn that tone up a little bit. And I can change the pitch of that using my keyboard. But it's not a very useful sound, and it gets a little bit annoying after a while. We're going to need to shape the volume of the sound so it fades out. We're going to need an envelope generator for this. I'm going to put these between the oscillator and the amplifier. Doesn't really matter where you put it, but that's where I'm going to put it for now. The first thing to be able to do is to say that every time I press a key on my keyboard, it's going to trigger the envelope, the ADSR envelope. So we take the gate, that is the trigger from the keyboard, and put it into the envelope generator. That's going to trigger that every time I press a key now. We need to take the output from the envelope generator, the positive output, which is this side, into the CV amount just here. Now, before I start pressing any buttons, I'm going to turn the volume down. It might be wise to do it, otherwise you might deafen yourself a little bit. So I'm going to turn that down quite a lot. And now we should get some sound. It still sounds the same, but actually the sound stops. Now when I stop on the keyboard, which is much more useful. So now at least we can play a little tune. The sound is now at full sustain. That means it's going to sustain at the full level. If I take the sustain down here, it's going to sustain at half a level. Now, we're going to take the sustain all the way down to the bottom for a minute, and we should get pretty much complete silence. We get a tiny click when the note starts, but that's all. Because the decay time is set to pretty much zeroed here. So if we take the decay time up to, let's say, 1000 milliseconds there or thereabouts, it will take 1 second to decay. So now when I press a note, it decays within a second. And now we've got something much more useful, which will sustain a little bit. So now if we take the attack time up to around about the same kind of time, it's going to attack for a second and decay for a second. We take the sustain level up to about 50%. It will attack, decay, and then sustain at 50% of the volume. And now if I turn the release time up to about a second as well, it will attack for a second, decay for a second, sustain as long as I hold the key down, and then when I let go, it will fade out for a second. Have a listen. So we're now shaping the volume of our sound. The next thing we want to do is to add a filter to alter the timbre of the sound. We're going to put that between the envelope and the amplifier. So I'm going to need to change a couple of the inputs here, because now I want the output from my oscillator to go into the filter. A filter takes away some of the frequencies. That's what it does. Think about what filters do to water. They take out impurities. Filter from a waveform takes out some of the frequencies depending on the type of filter that we're going to use. So it's going to go into the filter, and we are going to take the output from the filter into the amplifier now. So it's going in like a series kind of circuit here. There's three types of filters: there's low pass, band pass, and high pass. We're just going to use low pass for now. What low pass does, it just lets the low frequencies pass through, which is pretty standard for most analog synthesizers. And we're going to take that into the input. Now we shouldn't notice really any difference in the sound at the moment until we start to alter the cutoff. Listen to what happens when I take that down, the cutoff frequency. So if I take it down to around about 2000 Hertz, what that does, that means that it cuts off all frequencies above 2000 Hertz, just leaving the low frequencies, which gives a much more mellow sound. It gets rid of a lot of the high harmonic partials. So if I turn it up, we get all the frequencies because it's cutting off everything above 20,000 Hertz, which is the limit of human hearing. So we hear everything. Now, the next thing we want to do to kind of create some sort of shape to the sound is to add another envelope in. Now, this envelope will be to modulate the cutoff frequency of the filter. Bear with me here. Hopefully you're not too lost. So we're going to use it in the same way. I'm going to take the sustain all the way down. I'm going to take the decay a little bit up. And we're going to take the output of this to modulate the frequency of our filter. Now, it won't do anything yet until we change how much we want it to modulate it. So if I take it all the way up to the top, that's not doing anything yet because we need to take the cutoff level down. And when you take that down, you'll see what happens. Do you know what? This envelope is not being triggered. That's why I'm getting no sound. So I'm going to plug that into my gate. And now it's being triggered. And I can shape it accordingly. I can increase some resonance. Which increases the volume of the frequency that you're cutting off. So if I now cut off 5 Hertz at that point, and I've got the resonance set up high, then we get a boost of the sound at 5 kilohertz. The higher that goes, the higher the frequency we hear. So there we go. That's how to create a simple patch on voltage. Hope you enjoyed it. Have fun.